Trying with YouTube. Oh, I think YouTube is now live. Took a while. Okay, there we go. Okay, good morning, everybody. Shalom. Please let me know if you are there. Hi, Harvey. Harvey Barnett is with us. Marty's there. And Hannah and Andy. Harvey, I want to wish you again a happy birthday. Thank you for dedicating today's Torah study in honor of your bar mitzvah, your 64th anniversary. Wishing you many long, healthy, happy, and successful years ahead. Zu gesund, to health and happiness. And may today's Torah study serve to bless you with extraordinary blessings. If anybody else would like to study daily Torah study, weekly or monthly, you can do so at jewishgardens.com/donate or by calling the office 561-624-2223. That's 624-2223 or jewishgardens.com/donate. Marty, yes, new glasses, indeed. You got it. An observant Jew. Okay. While we're waiting for our other friends to join us, I'm just going to start off with Hayom Yom. See, YouTube is a little slow to turn on here, so I'm just going to get started with Hayom Yom. Today's Hayom Yom says as follows. It's the 10th day of Sivan. The Alter Rebbe responded. This is the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, the founder of Chabad. He responded to an individual at Yechidus in a private audience. The Jewish people are called Neirot, lamps. What's a lamp? A lamp is made up of a vessel, a wick, oil, and a flame. You have to have a vessel, oil, the wick, and the flame. That's what a candle is. But one must kindle the flame. You've got to turn it on, and then it sheds light. You've got a good lamp, said the Alter Rebbe to this fellow in private audience. You've got a good lamp, but you lack the igniter. What's the igniter? That's what we're going to learn about in today's Tanya class. You've got good tools, but you got to turn it on. You got to strike a match by sharply striking the stone of the animal soul. A spark of fire flies out and ignites the godly fire. This is exactly what we're going to be learning in today's Tanya class. You've got all the tools. You're doing well, says the Alter Rebbe to this Jew in private audience. You got a good candle. That means a vessel, wick, and oil. But in order to get your flame, you got to strike a match. You got to hit something hard. In this case, a stone, the stone of the animal soul, so that a spark flies out and ignites the godly fire. Today, we're learning Tanya, chapter 30, which is a continuation of what we learned in Tanya, chapter 29. We're talking about, and I'm going to explain the Hayom Yom in the context of the Tanya. We're talking about our ability to be sensitive and tuned into godliness. The way Tanya has explained this in chapter 3 and in the teen chapters of Tanya was that we're made up of 3 intellectual components. There's Chachma, which is the idea. There's Bina, the understanding. And then there's Das, which is the practical application, the personalization of the wisdom. Until the wisdom hasn't become yours, you've not fully understood it. You've got to go through Chachma, the idea. That's the spark of inspiration, the understanding of the idea, and then you got to feel the idea. It's not enough to understand the idea. You've got to feel it. You know, most of us will close the book and then finish learning. But Chabad teaches us that it's when you close the book, that's when you have to start the level of Das, which is the personalization of the idea to understand, to feel what you've learned. Once you've reached that level of Das, which is Chachma, Bina, Das, collectively making up Chabad, which is why Chabad means logic. Once you've reached the level of Das, that you've now personalized the wisdom It's now yours. It's now real. It's realized. Now you've unlocked the dam of emotion. Now you'll start to feel. But chapters 29 and 30 of Tanya address the problem of the one who just can't bridge the divide between Bina and Das, between understanding and realization. He has no problem comprehending. It makes sense. All this godly wisdom makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't touch his heart. What's he going to do about it? It just doesn't inspire any emotion within his heart. He's not able to personalize the wisdom. There seems to be a wall of apathy and indifference that prevents you from applying this wisdom, this godly wisdom personally. What are you going to do about it? And to this end, in 29 of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe introduced the quote from the Zohar, from the book of Kabbalah, that a log that doesn't catch fire needs to be splintered, needs to be broken up. If the thick log doesn't catch a light, it needs to be broken apart. And the Alter Rebbe used that analogy as the principal response to such a person, to the person struggling with that apathy, by saying that if your log is your candle, your log is your body, who you are now. If your log is not catching a light, or the light and inspiration of holiness, of godliness, you don't need more fire. What you need is smaller pieces. You need to splinter your log. You need to smash your log. You need to break it up into small pieces. And the way that you do that, the Alter Rebbe explained in the last chapter, was through confronting your sitra achra, your evil inclination, your other side, recognizing that the darkness is merely a shadow of the light. Evil doesn't exist on its own. It's merely its job is to cover over the light. And if you can speak truth to power, if you can confront it and recognize that really evil is nothing, then by simply realizing what a shmendrik you've been, how you've messed up, and actually verbally accosting, rebuking your evil inclination, you will bring it down. You'll break it down because it has none of its own legs to stand on. It will break apart. But in today's chapter, the Alter Rebbe addresses it one step further. He says, let's say you're struggling with indifference and apathy, and let's say you've applied the wisdom of the last chapter of Tanya, which was to break down the ego of your evil inclination by realizing how much it's messed you up, how much it's created a barrier between you and God, by simply realizing how much it's messed up your relationship with God, your marriage, your romantic relationship with God is being hindered and mitigated by your evil inclination. And by rebuking it, like Moses rebuked the spies at the threshold of the promised land. That will bring down your ego. But the problem is, you'll look around yourself and you'll say, well, at least I'm not as bad as everybody else around me. And you'll find solace in pushing the other people around you down. You'll say, well, at least I daven, they don't daven. At least I go to shul, they don't go to shul. At least I eat tefillin, at least I do this, that, or the other. And you'll say, I'm better than the other guys. I'm better than most of my fellow Jews. So now what's happened is that your evil inclination has caught itself on a twig as it's falling down the mountain. As your evil inclination is being shattered, as your log is being broken into smaller pieces, your Yetzer Hara, your evil inclination, will catch on a twig and say, well, I'm stopping here because I'm better than the people that are below me. And what will have happened here is that your very wise evil inclination will have mitigated its own downfall by being able to say those people are worse off than I am. And thus maintaining its sense of ego. Effectively curbing the further splintering of its log, and thus not allowing your log to catch fire, not allowing you to be inspired, not allowing, in the context of the Hayom Yom we just learned, not allowing your candle to catch a light. Remember the words of the Alter Rebbe, you got to strike a match, you got to strike a stone. It's got to hurt, you got to give a patch, a zetz. You got to break something in order for the sparks to fly so that your candle can be lit. You've got to break your ego all the way. So whilst chapter 29 told us halfway how to break our ego by confronting it, realizing how it's toxic for you and your relationship with God, and then rebuking it, still your evil inclination will be able to hold on to its own ego by saying other people are much worse off than I am. That's why chapter 30 comes in and explains to us that you're actually much worse than all those other people that you think are lower than you. What's going to happen now is, and after the Alter Rebbe explains it in chapter 30, what's going to happen now is that you'll start to realize that you're actually much worse than everybody else around you. You think that you're so holy because you go to shul and they don't. You think you're so holy because you at least study Torah and they don't. Really, it's the other way around. You are worse than them, spiritually speaking. They are your spiritual superiors, not inferiors, and thus you'll come crashing all the way down to the bottom of the canyon. At that point, you will have experienced humility. At that point, you will have struck your match, struck your flintstone. Sparks will now fly because your log has been broken up into tiny little pieces. That log was never able to catch a light. But now that it's smashed up into little tiny pieces, because you're at the very bottom of the canyon, now you're going to be able to be inspired. Now you're going to be able to go from understanding Bina to Da'at, which is personalization of the wisdom, not only to understand the greatness of God, but to feel the greatness of God. Not only to understand the importance of prayer, but to feel a conversation in prayer. Das. To be Chabad. At the end of this chapter, we're going to feel so humble that there's a risk we might fall into depression. And because of that, in order to curb, you may remember that in chapter 26, we said that the worst thing ever is depression. You've always got to stay upbeat and positive. But how can you stay upbeat and positive if you're lower than everybody else? For that, we're going to have chapters 31 and 32 and 33 and 34 and 35. Those chapters are going to emphasize joy. How you can still find joy despite being humble. We're going to speak about the difference between depression, which is a never fly zone, and bitterness, which is a very good place to be. So that's where we're going in chapter 30 today. We're talking about overcoming apathy to godliness, which requires the breaking up of the evil inside of you. In chapter 29, we discussed how to shatter the ego, but you can still find comfort knowing that you are at least better than most of everybody else. So here in chapter 30, we're going to take it a step further, that we're going to talk about humility, feeling humble to all other people, even the lowlifes. We're going to be more humble than even the lowlifes. Watch what's going to happen today. Today we're going to talk about understanding the power of humility and how to take advantage of it. Okay? Here goes. So I'm going to do this chapter mostly outside today, mostly outside of the text, but if you do have the book, we're on page 340 in this book, The Practical Tanya. So you can't feel with your heart what your brain understands. You can't bridge the gap between Bina, comprehension, and Das, realization, or personalization. You're stuck. Not because you're lacking in wisdom. You get all the wisdom. Your heart is just not feeling. It's just not sensitive. Spiritual heart congestion. This is heart congestion on a spiritual level. Spiritual heart congestion is caused by feeling smug. That's what the Alter Rebbe tells us. when you feel too good about yourself, that's what causes spiritual heart congestion. It's a heart attack. I guess that when you have a heart attack, a physical heart attack, God forbid, it's because there's too much fat in your arteries. There's too much cholesterol. Your heart is blocked off from the rest of your body. It's just not connecting like it should. Spiritual heart attack is caused by the same. When you're too fat, when you feel too good about yourself, you got to break it apart. You got to separate, you've got to break down all that fatness to be able to allow the heart to be properly connected with the rest of your body. For carry on, I'd like to welcome Mickey and Susie Houseman. Haven't seen you in so long, Susie. Welcome. I was thinking about you the other day. My brother from Monsey, Shalom, Frank Verna, Judy Schuster, Shalom Miriam, Shalom Lucy Brown, one of our nurses in the community. Thank you for all your hard work, keeping us all safe. And from Virginia, from the back of the bus, welcome to Warren and Helen, to Deborah Goodman from Atlanta, and Elaine, good morning, Boker Tov. Nice to see everybody. Please do share your comments, your thoughts, post your questions on Facebook and on YouTube so that I could hear what you have to say. It gives me more enthusiasm to know that I'm talking to someone here. It's difficult to talk to a screen otherwise. Would love to hear how you feel about what I'm saying. If you agree, disagree, good, bad, or ugly. Okay. And because spiritual heart congestion is caused by feeling smug, you can fix that. That's what the Alter Rebbe, the doctor of our souls, tells us in Tanya chapter 29 and 30. How to break apart our log. How to feel humble. How to break our ego. Remember, we said in 29 that we are our evil inclination. When we break ourselves, we're breaking our evil inclination. When we realize how low we've fallen, we're actually breaking the ego of our evil inclination, breaking our log, striking the match, so that our soul can turn on fire. You know, you'll often see people finding religion after a life crisis. Why do people do that? Why is it that after, God forbid, the death of a child, the breaking apart of a business, a divorce, why is it that you find in many of those cases people find religion? Oh, I'd like to welcome Stuart Levitt. He's commemorating the yahrzeit today. Stuart, whose yahrzeit is that? Is it a parent's yahrzeit today? Stuart's father. May his soul have an elevation in Gan Eden. Stu, I see you just joined us. And today's Torah study actually is dedicated in loving memory of Stuart's father, Yosef Dovid ben Yisrael. On the occasion of his yahrzeit today, the 10th of Sivan, we'll be doing a special memorial prayer, Stu, at the end of today's Torah study to elevate the soul of your father, Yosef Dovid ben Yisrael. Glad you're able to join us. So, back to Tanya. Why do people discover religion after a life crisis? Is that because they're feeling vulnerable? Is that because they're weak? No. Tanya teaches us something profound. It's because they were broken. The life crisis, the breaking of the business, the financial blow, the death in the family, God forbid, the divorce, simply broke them to smithereens. It broke their log into small pieces, and it allowed the fire for the first time in their lives to catch a light. For the first time that they can remember, they're not feeling smug. They're broken. And because they're broken, now they are receptive to the light. This is the power of humility. And I think it was Terry Zweig from Atlanta, who mentioned last week in the class that the power of humility is something beautiful, powerful insight. She said that if you can't bring yourself to be humble from the inside on your own, then God might need to send you events from the outside to break you, to make you humble. Not because God is trying to hurt you, but maybe because God is trying to help you find the light. You think that your life is so great atop the ivory tower. But what you fail to realize is that you're living in the darkness. And for you to be able to truly experience the light, you need to be broken. It's a gift that you're experiencing from heaven, as painful as it sounds, which is going to allow you to be receptive to the light. I'd like to share with you a story that might be difficult to understand, but really falls into beautiful focus with this introduction. It's a story about the Baal Shem Tov. It's Yortzeit. We commemorated a few days ago in the festival of Shavuos, 260th Yortzeit of the Baal Shem Tov. The founder of Chassidus, he was the teacher of the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya. He was the Rebbe's Rebbe. He was the Alter Rebbe's Rebbe. The Tanya is based on his teachings. So the Baal Shem Tov understood the profound impact, spiritual impact of the blowing of the shofar in Rosh Hashanah. One year he asked one of his Chassidim, Reb Wolf Kitzis, to prepare himself to blow the shofar this year. It was an extraordinary privilege for the Rebbe to ask this Chassid to blow the shofar in his presence on Rosh Hashanah. And he asked him to prepare by studying all of the Kabbalistic works that were necessary to have in mind at the time of the blowing of the shofar. Reb Wolf was a very celebrated chassid. He was a profound scholar. He understood the meaning of this, and he set himself to the task. He started studying all that the Kabbalah has to teach about the meditations of the blowing of the shofar. And he took all of his teachings, he summarized them into a little note. He wrote down his little meditations, what he needed to remember at the time of the blowing of the shofar. He put this note in his pocket, and he prepared himself on Rosh Hashanah for the blowing of the shofar. He comes up to the beam on Rosh Hashanah, preparing to blow the shofar. This is the holiest moment of the year. He reaches into his pocket to bring out his note, but alas, it's gone. It's not there. Reb Zev is crestfallen. He was in trust. The Rebbe had trusted in him. The Rebbe believed that he had what it took to lead the congregation, to lead the Rebbe's congregation, the Baal Shem Tov, for the holiest moments of the year, the blowing of the shofar, and he had let down his Rebbe. He couldn't remember. He was flustered, stage fright. He couldn't remember all the meditations. With a shattered heart, a broken soul, he realizes he has no choice but to proceed. He's on the stage. He goes forward and just absolutely shattered, he blows the shofar. After blowing the shofar, he just slinks away, he hides in a corner. And he's shocked. After the services, Rosh Hashanah day, the Baal Shem Tov walks over to him and he says, "Thank you for the most beautiful shofar blowing that I ever heard." Reb Wolf is flabbergasted. Most beautiful. You got to be kidding me. You know that I lost my paper. I couldn't find my meditations. I couldn't remember anything. I wasn't thinking anything spiritual while I was blowing the shofar. The Baal Shem Tov proceeded to explain. The kavanot, the meditations, they're all keys. Each key unlocking another door in our souls. Each key accessing another chamber in the supernal worlds. But there is one key that unlocks all the doors. One key that opens up for us the innermost chambers of the divine palace. That key is a master key. The master key is a broken heart. And that's exactly what you experienced, said the Baal Shem Tov to Reb Wolf. When you got up there without your notes, you were just shattered. You were broken. You felt tiny. You just wanted to bury yourself on the spot. You felt less significant than anyone else in this room. You were so broken that you were so humble that you had experienced the master key which unlocked all the heavenly doors. That was the most beautiful shofar blowing I ever heard. Friends, this is the power of humility. The power of humility is to break your log. And this is such a fundamental principle in Tanya. There is evil all around us. We were created with evil inside of us. It's inseparable from our own identity. 29 of Tanya explained that our identity is more identified with our animal soul, with our evil inclination, than it is with our godly soul, with our good inclination. We've got a serious problem, by the way. It all began in the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve ate from that fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The fruit of the tree of knowledge, of intimate knowledge of good and evil. That's when evil became part and parcel of our core identity. Tanya explains our purpose in this world is to shift our identity alignment from our animal soul to our godly soul. The one way that we can make this happen, the one way that we can overcome the misery of our lives, and all human beings experience pain and suffering and misery, self-inflicted because of our own ego. The only way that we can unidentify, de-identify with our default setting of our evil inclination is by breaking our evil inclination, by breaking its ego, by experiencing humility. It's that quote from the Zohar that the thick log doesn't catch fire. During these days of quarantine, we spend a lot of time with our kids in the backyard, making bonfires. They love it. But we always bring these thick logs, and I meditate upon the thick logs. None of them catch a light. It's only the tiny little pine cones. The tiny pine needles, they catch a light. The kids ask me, Tati, why is it this is huge wood? Why doesn't it catch a light? And I try to explain to them. Because it's too full of itself. It's too densely packed together. There's no space for the fire. It's the tiny pieces that let the fire catch a light. This is a fundamental principle in our spiritual journey. If you want to be receptive to spirituality, you've got to break your ego. Do that through realizing how your ego is destroying your life with God, destroying your life in general. Confront your ego, rebuke it like we learned last week. And this week in chapter 30, we're going to talk about how you're more humble, how you can be more humble than everybody else around you. But this is the core principle here. The core principle issue is the realization that it's the ego that blocks the light, and humility that will allow the light to shine within you. So how can you experience humility beyond other people? You look around you and you see the guys that are, the vagrants that are hanging around in the street corners. People that are clearly spiritually inferior to you. Don't judge them by your standards. The key principle here is, quoted from Ethics of the Fathers, chapter 2. Do not judge your friend until you reach his place. Don't judge anybody until you stand in their shoes. Compared to you, they might be spiritually inferior. But compared to themselves, they too are waging a spiritual battle. In fact, their spiritual battle is far greater than your spiritual battle. Why? Think of it this way. They stand out there in the streets. They're exposed to all sorts of seduction and temptation, much more than you do when you go to Shul and Shabbos, when you are spiritually elevated, when you're studying Torah. You're having far less spiritual temptation than they are. Yet somehow they are fighting a raging fire of temptation and seduction, much less than you are. You have no idea what kind of struggle they're going through. And because by very virtue of where they are located, out there in the big wide world, in the concrete jungle, because they're out there, therefore their struggle is far greater a struggle than yours. Their struggle vis-a-vis your struggle is incomparable. And that's why you cannot say that you are spiritually superior to them. If you were in their shoes, fighting the way you're fighting your evil inclination right now, you'd be much worse off than them. Now, that's not an excuse for where they are right now. They are called Kal Shebekalim, the lowest of the low, because their behavior is inexcusable. But still, when it comes to the degree of battle against evil, they are fighting a high intensity battle. And because of that, you have to see them as your spiritual superiors. You have to see them as your superior spiritually. How much are you fighting your evil inclination every single day? Think about that a moment. Maybe it's your nature. Maybe you enjoy studying Torah. For them to study Torah doesn't come naturally. Imagine somebody that just hates to daven. Imagine somebody that just doesn't like to pray. And you are more spiritually inclined. You like to pray. You like to read. And the other person hates to read. So then you got two people praying in the synagogue. Is the one that's praying with more devotion holier than the one who's sort of like staring at the windows? No. Because the one who's staring at the windows is fighting a much greater battle than the one who's looking inside the book. We can never truly know this. Only God sees into the hearts of all men. It's with this perspective, in terms of the actual battle, that we start to realize that the people that we think are lower than us are absolutely not lower than us. And it's merely your deluded sense of ego and inflated sense of arrogance that makes me and you feel that we're better than anybody else. You have no idea how hard they're fighting. You have no idea how hard they're fighting. And that's the perspective that the Alter Rebbe introduces us to now in chapter 30 of Tanya. By the way, he says one more point. He says, are you breaking yourself at all? Maybe you're an academic kind of person and you just like to study stuff. So for you, it's not a big deal to study Torah. For you, it's not a big deal to make blessings on food or to do mitzvahs, because you're maybe a people pleaser. Maybe it just comes to you naturally to please other people. You like to please God. And the vagrant on the street, what the Alter Rebbe calls the Kal Shebekalim, the lowest of the low person, for him, he doesn't want to please anybody. And for him to do a tiny little mitzvah when he meets the Chabadnik on the street in Manhattan, the mitzvah tank, and he says to him, are you Jewish? Would you like to lay tefillin? The 60 seconds that the guy's laying tefillin at the Western Wall or in Manhattan, those 60 seconds, that guy's breaking himself much more, breaking his natural instinct, much more than you are after 600 hours of prayer, because they come to you naturally. Are you really breaking yourself? And he gives another example, very interesting. How much did you break yourself today? How much did you break your ego? Did you break your evil inclination today? When you're in the middle of some juicy piece of slander, like real juicy slander, and you know that moment when you realize that you're saying slander? It comes to you, creeps up at you. You're having such a good time. Everybody's enjoying. Everybody's laughing, except for the person that you're talking about, obviously, right? And you're feeling so popular. You're feeling on top of the world. You feel amazing. But then it creeps into your mind the thought that, I think this is Lashon Hara. But what do? You ignore the thought. You kind of push it away ever so casually to say, I'll think of that thought after I'm finished speaking. Guess what? You didn't break your evil inclination. You indulged your evil inclination. Think about how many times you've overwhelmed your evil inclination. What is your evil inclination vis-a-vis that person's evil inclination? And you really have no idea. Chances are that because they're exposed to so much temptation, so much more than you're exposed to, they're doing a much better job at curbing their impulse than you are. And with that perspective, the Alter Rebbe says, you've got to have a shval ruach b'fnei kol ha'adam. You've got to be humble before every single person. No other person can ever be viewed as your spiritual inferior, because you simply have no clue as to what kind of battle they're fighting. In fact, the fact that you think that they're lower than you because of their behavior means that they've got higher exposure to temptation, and therefore, chances are that they're fighting their evil inclination much more than you are. So you should be humble before them. And that's why when you're crashing down, when you're breaking your ego, from chapter 29, when you've faced your ego, you've identified your evil inclination as the prostitute hired by the king in that magnificent metaphor that we mentioned last week. If you missed it, you can find those classes at youtube.com/Jewish Gardens under the playlist called Tanya. It's youtube.com/Jewish Gardens under the playlist called Tanya. You can find all the previous classes of Tanya. Go to chapter 29 and you can review that class. The metaphor of the prostitute that was hired by the king. You can confront your evil inclination and say, I know who you are. I'm blowing your cover. I know that you're only here to test me and I'm not going to fail this test. But on your way down, when you're breaking your ego, you might grab onto that branch and say, oh, I'm stopping here because I'm better than those people. Comes chapter 30 and says, no. You're not better than anybody else. You're worse than anybody else. You should be humble before every single person. And now you might be lucky enough, might be wise and courageous enough to break yourself to the point that your log is broken into small pieces so that in the fire, the light can now shine inside of you. Another example that the Alter Rebbe gives in chapter 30 is prayer. So you showed up in shul, you davened, very nice. But how much did you daven on a qualitative level? You showed up, you davened, very nice. But did you force yourself to focus despite the distractions of your evil inclination? Were you able to pray, quote from the Alter Rebbe, ad mitzui hanefesh, which means to the very least of your soul. When I say least, I'm quoting Homer. Drinking life to the least of life, which is, the least at the bottom of the wine. To drink life to the very, very bottom of the bottle. Are you praying to the very bottom of your soul, from the very depths of your being? Or are you praying at a very, very superficial level, just saying the words or feeling a very, very, very superficial emotion? Unless you're breaking yourself, you're breaking your ego, your evil impulse, to pray from the very depths and every fiber of your being, you're nowhere near the challenges that the so-called vagrant, the so-called lowest of the low, is fighting and is battling with. Because of this, friends, the Alter Rebbe concludes, we have no way to pride ourselves feeling that we are somehow better, more elevated than anybody else. No. We are lower. Be humble before every single person. And I know many people that are struggling with ego, and they genuinely feel that they're better than other people. They genuinely find solace and comfort knowing that they are holier than the others. The Alter Rebbe says you're deluding yourself. You're making a grave mistake. You got to break your ego. In fact, another reason why you're worse than them? One final point that the Alter Rebbe adds in chapter 30. You should know better because you've learned so much Torah. You did go to Hebrew school. You did go to a day school. You had parents that were maybe a little bit much more religious or more traditional. You, in fact, should know much better than everybody else. And you're held to a higher standard. So whichever way you want to slice this, you have no reason to feel better than anybody else. You are lower than everybody else. And now at this point, the Alter Rebbe has successfully brought us to the point where we feel shattered. We feel splintered. Our log is chopped up into tiny little pieces, and we are ready to let this fire light. We now are able to experience Chabad, Chachma idea, Bina understanding, and cruise into Dat, which is feeling. Taking that wisdom, not only understanding it with our brain, but feeling it with our heart. Because if you can be strong enough to break your ego, your log will set alight. You'll be able to feel the light. You'll be able to let the light of the fire shine within you, just like we learned in today's Hayom Yom. To remind you, the Alter Rebbe said to the Jew, your in private audience, your candle is perfect, but you haven't ignited your candle because you've got to break your evil impulse. I just want to read those words again in today's Hayom Yom. You have a good lamp, but you lack the igniter. By sharply striking the stone of the animal soul, a spark of fire flies out and ignites the godly fire. This, my friends, is the power of humility. Humility in America today is something which we shy away from. Hi, Charlotte. We shy away from humility. It's like something which is negative. Nobody wants to be a doormat. Nobody wants to be a shmata. In fact, in the social media world we live in today, it's about me, me, me. Look at the food that I'm eating. Look at the car that I'm driving. Look at the vacations that I'm going. Look at how popular I am. I'm so this. I am. We live in the generation of self-promotion. We live in the generation of building up our ego and of spiritual darkness. Friends, we got to fight this. We got to break this. The Tanya is changing our world. It's turning it's upside down. If you're into self-promotion, if you're into I am, you'll never see the light. A person once wrote to the Rebbe a letter complaining about all sorts of problems that they were experiencing spiritually. Can't do this, I can't do that, this is not working, that's not working. The Rebbe simply circled the first word of every single sentence in the letter. The first word was I. Every word, every sentence began with the word I. And the Rebbe wrote, apparently this is your problem. You're so obsessed with your ego, obviously the light won't shine within you. It's time for us to reinvent ourselves, friends. After learning chapters 29 and 30 of Tanya, it's time for us to embrace the power of humility, to be able to splinter our logs, to break up that density so that we can be receptive to the light, to disidentify with our evil inclination and our animal soul, and to re-identify with our godly soul and our good inclination only through the power of humility. Lest we feel a sense of depression, the Alter Rebbe is about to point out in the next chapter that there's a profound difference between bitterness and depression. Depression is the prime demotivator. When you're feeling depressed, you don't want to do anything. You want to just... But when you're feeling bitter, that is a very motivating emotion. When you're feeling bitter, you feel it. You want to fix it. And that's what we're trying to do right now. Never should you feel depressed. Even over your sins. And we spoke about this in chapter 26 and 27 and 28. We spoke about the way that you're supposed to handle negative emotions. Over your sins, over your evil inclination. We spoke about that in those various chapters. You can find those classes at youtube.com/Jewish Gardens under the Tanya playlist. That's youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. Never should you feel depressed. It's only about bitterness. Bitterness is a motivator. It's what motivates you to do the right thing when you're feeling bitter. I think about after the Holocaust, if the Jews were depressed, there's no hope. They just threw in the towel and they just intermarried or something. God forbid. But when they were feeling bitter, they said they try to destroy us, but we're going to show them. That's when they rebuilt their own country. That's when they rebuilt their businesses, rebuilt their families, had children, because they were coming from a place of bitterness. Think of the Satmar community in Williamsburg, in New York. You know, these were decimated by the Holocaust. They lost the millions of their brethren in the Holocaust. Hundreds of thousands. But they were not depressed. They were just bitter. They created a community which still has elements of bitterness, unfortunately. They're very, very sequestered, very insulated. And you know what? Different strokes for different folks. Certainly not for us to judge them. But their style is about rebuilding with fervor. They want to rebuild a world that was snatched and taken away from them. When the world turned its back on them, they turning their back on the world. And you know what? You can totally understand where they're coming from. They've done a wonderful job of recreating a lost world. They're coming from a place of bitterness. And understandably so, how would you feel if you lost hundreds of thousands of your brethren? But they've turned that into a motivator, into something that incentivizes them to rebuild. And we too can experience bitterness when we intelligently face our challenges, not through depression, ever, but through bitterness. And that's what we're going to be talking about in the next few chapters, 31 through 35 of Tanya. Stay tuned with me on Tuesdays. Tuesdays for Tanya. I see Andy added a comment. From the depths, I call to you, oh God. And I want to point out to you, Andy, that it's actually not from the depths. It's not from the depths. Meitzar means from the narrow straits, from the tight spaces. When you say from the depths, you mean mi ma'amakim kraticha Hashem, which is a different verse. From the depths I call out to you, O God. Mi ma'amakim kraticha Hashem. This verse, mina meitzar kratika, means from the narrow straits I called upon you, God. And that verse means that from the tight spaces, when I feel humble, that's when I'm sensitive to godliness. But your point is certainly well received. And absolutely spot on. So friends, this is what we've learned about today. If you have any questions, comments, or criticism, please let me know. Share your comments here on Facebook and on YouTube. It's a pleasure to study with you. I'm just going to conclude today's study with a special prayer for the father of Stuart Levitt, whose soul we're elevating in Gan Eden today. His name, his yahrzeit is today. His name is Yosef Dovid ben Yisrael. And today is the occasion of his yahrzeit. So I'm going to make a memorial prayer. If you have the prayer book, it's on page 466. Rabbi Yosef David ben Yisrael, Sholach Le'lamoy. Ba'avur Shebli Neder. Yitnu letzedaka ba'ad askaras nishmos began Eden te'ei menuchas soilachin balaracham im yasteri basis knafaf lilamim ve'yisra Rabbi Tzarachim nishmos yadin yunachalos yivinochal nishkav v'sholem v'nimar ramein. O God, full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant true rest upon the wings of the divine presence, in the exalted spheres of the holy and pure, who shine as the resplendence of the firmament to the soul of Yosef David ben Yisrael, who has gone to his supernal world. The father of Stuart Levitt, for charity has been donated in remembrance of his soul. May his place of rest be in the Garden of Eden. Therefore, may the All-Merciful One shelter him with the cover of his wings forever, and bind his soul in the bond of life. The Lord is his heritage. May he rest in his resting place in peace. And now let us respond. Amen. Thank you, folks, for joining me here this morning. Thank you, Harvey Barnett, for dedicating today's Torah study in honor of your bar mitzvah, your anniversary of 64 years. Thank you, Stuart Levitt, for dedicating today's Torah in memory of your father and the elevation of his soul in Gan Eden. If you'd like to dedicate a day of Torah study, a week or a month of Torah study, you can do so online at jewishgardens.com/donate. That's jewishgardens.com/donate. Or by calling the office at 561-624-2223, or simply 561-6-Chabad. Remember, our shul is open. We have safety protocols, and they are to be adhered to very, very carefully. Masks at all times, social distancing, and the other safety protocols that have been emailed out to the community. They also are on our website. Our shul is open, but on Shabbos, you do need to make a prior reservation. We are capping the attendance still now, according to our medical advisory, to 40 people. So you do need a reserve to come on Shabbos morning. We are also open daily for daily morning minyan at 7:30 a.m. And we'd love to have you join us to help us make our minyan because of these difficult times. And we hope to see you there. Daily Torah study does not happen live. It only happens over here for the time being, according to medical directives. If we were doing it live, I would need to be wearing a mask, and I don't know how comfortable that would be to do it online like this. But for the time being, we are doing daily Torah study only over the internet. I do hope to carry it on even after we go live. If we are looking for methods of building some technology into the shul here that will allow us to do some sort of a YouTube camera or Facebook camera that will allow us to be more efficient in broadcasting and live streaming these classes. If anybody would like to sponsor that, please let me know. And with that, I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining me here today. Over and out. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.